we've been talking about fivefold ministry. Last week we talked about harvesting leaders. Fivefold ministry is from Ephesians chapter number 4, verses 11 through 16. It is the Lord's blueprint for how the church, Big C Church, should be led. And there's also a blueprint that every local church should pray into and strive for in the proper sense, that we move away from the non-biblical paradigm of one person leading a church. That was never God's intent. It's amazing how in the American church especially, there's usually one person that is the leader, and what do we typically call that person? Pastor. Here's a little bit of trivia. Do you know how many times pastor is referred to in the New Testament? Once in the office of pastor. The other four, apostles, prophets, evangelists, and teachers, are mentioned frequently, but pastor is only mentioned once, and for some reason, we hijacked that very seldom used word and made it the whole of leadership in the evangelical and charismatic church. And a lot of churches have been coming around to this, but let me just tell you, the reason why the old wineskin hasn't been exchanged is because it's extremely difficult to move out of that paradigm. There are a lot of leaders that don't want to say, well, wait a minute, I'm not in charge anymore. I'm not the one-man show. I'm not the one-woman show. And there are a lot of leaders like, hey, I worked real hard to get to this place. And they treat it like, the corporate world. And then, frankly, for leaders that are willing to do it, there's a lot of church members that are like, no. We want to know who's in charge, so when we're happy, we can bless them, and when we're not happy, we can find them. And God's blueprint is that there would be team ministry, team leadership, 5 offices leading together to equip the saints for the work of the ministry. You know who's supposed to, I'm just going to go ahead and pre-offend you. You know who's supposed to do the work in a local church? You! You know what we do? Let's try to take up enough money on Sunday to pay the other person to do our work, and then we'll rate the music and the services and decide on the sermons and decide whether we come back or not. I'm just telling you like it is, okay? It's not necessarily true in this house. I don't feel any of that here, but it's because we intentionally have been working to go against this. And today, I want to talk to you on the topic of relearning what a pastor is. I just want to go ahead and say this. Some of you are pastors. You're not ordained. You're not preaching. You don't want to preach. You're not graced or gifted to preach. But you're a shepherd. You're a pastor. You carry the caring portion of the heart of God within your spirit. And you're going to learn today that you may have been a pastor your whole life and nobody's ever released you to step into that. And we're going to break that today. Because what this church needs, listen, we've got very solid apostolic leadership. We've got a very solid prophetic group of people that are here. I found out yesterday through many in this house taking an online fivefold quiz, we've got a lot of teachers in this house. And we need more evangelists and we need more shepherd pastors. And as we move forward, guys, these aren't going to be luxuries that we wished we had. They're going to be necessities moving forward. So look with me in Ezekiel. I hope you brought a Bible today. If not, download an app on your phone, do whatever you got to do. But we're going to be in Ezekiel 34 to open up with as we begin relearning what a pastor is. In verse number 11 of the book of Ezekiel, chapter 34, it says, "Thus says the Lord God, behold, I myself will search for my sheep and will seek them out. As a shepherd seeks out his flock when he is among his sheep that have been scattered, so will I seek out my sheep, and I will rescue them from all places where they've been scattered, as on a day of clouds and thick darkness. I will bring them out from the peoples and gather them from the countries, and will bring them into their own land. I will feed them on the mountains of Israel, by the ravines and all their inhabited places of the country. I will feed them with good pasture, and on the mountain heights of Israel shall be their grazing land. There they shall lie down in good grazing land, and on rich pasture they shall feed on the mountains of Israel. I myself will be the shepherd of my sheep, and I myself will make them lie down, declares the Lord God. I will seek the lost, and I will bring back the strayed, and I will bind up the injured. I will strengthen the weak, and the fat and the strong I will destroy." Those are the bad guys, by the way. I will feed them, I will feed them injustice. The reason why I opened up with that is because I'm trying in this message to show you that God cares deeply for individual lambs and the flock that belongs to him. God has a shepherd's heart. Sure, he's apostolic. Jesus Christ left heaven to come to a sin-cursed earth to establish the kingdom of God. He's evangelistic. He goes to seek and to save those who are lost. He's a teacher. They called him Rabboni, rabbi. The Lord is obviously prophetic. Jesus, all throughout his ministry, told us what to look for to come. But never miss the fact that a shepherd's heart is in God and comes from God, and he releases it to the people of God. And some of you carry that and nobody's ever told you. They mistake you for being sweet and nice and compassionate, and they reduce it to human terms of personality and temperament. And nobody's ever told some of you, no, you have the shepherd heart of God on your life. You may have a shepherding grace and an office of pastor. You may have something more than just a tenderness and a kindness. It actually may be attached to your life purpose, but you've always been told that the pastor has to stand in the pulpit and preach a 45-minute sermon every Sunday, exegete the scriptures, win the lost, run the church, do the budget, advance missions, and you're thinking, that's not me, I must not be a pastor. Well, it's my pleasure to blow up that false paradigm today and to invite you to consider maybe that's exactly who you are, and maybe it's just never presented in a way where you could receive it. Let me give you a quote. I never use quotes in my messages, but this series will have a few of them. A man named Robert Stone, in amazing book on fivefold ministry, he says this: a pastor is a shepherd who's entrusted with the ministry of tending the flock of God, with feeding, guiding, and superintending them. Pastors need to appreciate the unique call that God has placed upon them. Few can genuinely and adequately fulfill the daunting responsibility of the pastoral office unless they are divinely called and graced to do so. Those with the gifting, ministry, and office of pastoring have a vitally important calling. However, it is slow work that requires steady patience and commitment, and that often lacks the glamour of some of the other types of ministry. True, true, true. I don't have the grace of pastor. I'm not a pastor. I know how to act like one. I know how to do the work of one. I'm not one. I've never been one. But I've had to squeeze into that paradigm for close to 30 years now. And I'm happily exiting that. Come hell or high water, I'm done with it. And I'm going to step more fully into what is my calling, which we'll talk about on a different week. But let me tell you a little bit about pastors, and then we'll look how God operates. First of all, pastors are less about revelation and more about relationship. Pastors are less about missional advance and more about communal gatherings. Pastors are less about conquering territory and more about caring for people. And here's the thing. All of that stuff is good, but there has to be a grace to be able to do it. And when somebody is operating outside of their grace, they're ineffective and, maybe more importantly, very unhappy. And so some of you have had pastors in the past that were leading the church that you began to attend, and over time you got frustrated because he or she wasn't winning the lost like you win the lost. He or she never wanted to have prayer meetings for 4 hours for the glory to fall because you in your prophetic vein said that's exactly what needs to happen. That pastor didn't like conflict, so at times he was just trying to be not just a peacemaker, but a peacekeeper, and you wondered, why don't you go in there and bust that demon out of that person? Well, that's because the grace on you is different than the grace that was on him or her. And what we've done is we've held our leaders to a faulty sense of what we believe they should be and failed to acknowledge and recognize the grace that is on them. Oftentimes, and by the way, I haven't always been in ministry. I was a church member, and then I was a junior staff member, and then I became lead pastor many, many years ago. But I remember sitting there at times frustrated with my pastor because all I could see was what he wasn't. And I failed to treasure and prize what he was. The problem was, in that context back then, he had to be all of it. That's the way we had it set up. He needed to be apostolic. He needed to be prophetic. We're Baptists, so we didn't really lean into the prophetic or the apostolic, but he needed to be evangelistic. I remember one time he told me, he said, Jeff, I just can't walk up to a complete stranger and share the gospel with them. And I thought, heresy! I mean, I literally thought, how dare you're the pastor, right? He was an incredible pastor. He was great with people. But he wasn't going to be the evangelistic John the Baptist turn or burn kind of messenger. And all I could see was what he wasn't. And sadly for him, a lot of people viewed it that way. People that wanted a pastor, they flocked to him in droves. But people that wanted mission, people that wanted the prophetic, people that wanted something outside of the local gathering and all of us having a perpetual holy embrace, hugging each other and loving each other and casserole dishes and things like that. Those things are great. They have their place. But we expected him to be all those things, and it was unfair. Because it takes all 5 gifts and graces working together, not competing with each other, working together so that the body is equipped to do the work of the ministry, and the head of the body is always the one getting the glory. Okay? All right, so let's walk through this. I'm going to give you a little bit out of Ezekiel 34, and then a few other things, and then a few other things after that. And then you're going to leave, and you're going to go out there and eat lunch and join the church. Okay, here we go. All right, so let's go through this Ezekiel 34, and I just want to share with you, it is God's heart to shepherd his people. Please hear this, especially if you're feeling like what I described earlier might be you, that pastoral heart. The pastor is a protector. That's part of the role of a shepherd. He's using the paradigm of an actual shepherd with an actual flock of sheep. But God says, this is the illustration I'm using about how I care for my people. And so it says, thus says the Lord, I myself will search for my sheep. I will seek them out. As a shepherd seeks out his flock when he's among the sheep that have been scattered, so will I seek out my sheep. I will rescue them from all the places where they've been scattered on a day of clouds and thick darkness. So the thing right off the bat in Ezekiel 34 that I see about the Lord's heart as a shepherd is he's always got his eye on the flock. And not just the flock, but the sheep within the flock. Because those verses tell us the majority of the flock could be over here, but you got this one little wayward sheep, and God's like, my eye is on you. I'm going after it. The shepherd's heart always looks at the people. The pastor's heart is primarily graced to be a horizontally connected person. It doesn't mean they don't have a vertical relationship with the Lord. They must. What it means is their activity is primarily horizontal. What's going on with the sheep? What's happening with this person's life? What's happening over here? This one looks downcast. I haven't seen this one in a while. I heard this one had strayed. This one is grieving. That's a pastor's heart. They care. They're not wanting to sit for 4 hours waiting for the glory to fall so they can figure out what the territorial spirit is that they need to bring down. That's not the pastor. You don't probably want that prophet, that high-level apostolic or prophetic person sitting down with somebody who needs a moment of comfort. Because the prophetic person is going to be, you've got a demon of depression on you. We're going to cast that thing out. And the apostle's going to look at him and say, you got 30 minutes to cry it out, and we're going to get right back on mission. Am I telling the truth? But the pastor will say, apostle, prophet, y'all go conquer the world. I'm going to sit here with this family for as long as it takes. That's God's heart. That's good. That's righteous. That's right. God says, that's how I feel about my people. The pastor is also a gatherer and a nurturer in verse 13 and 14. He says, I'll bring them out from the peoples and gather them from the countries, and I'll bring them into. Everybody say, God brings us out. And then say, God brings us in. All right, some of y'all are stuck between the out and the in. He's not done with you. He can get you out of your sin, get you out of condemnation, get you out of judgment. He's not done when that happens. He says, I got to bring you into the promises I have for you. I got to bring, and so he leads, and so he's nurturing and gathering. I'll bring them out from where they were. I'll bring them into where they need to be. I'll feed them. And he says again in verse 14, I'm going to feed them. I'm going to give them good pasture. I'm going to take them up high on the mountain heights of Israel. I'm going to give them a place to graze. They'll lie down. And man, that sounds great. God's like, hey, why don't you come and eat? Why don't you come and let's go up the mountain together, and then why don't you rest? I've just got you this green, lush field. Lay down in there for a little bit. That was a long climb up. You've been through a journey. I brought you out. I'm bringing you in, and you need a little rest. That's a pastor's heart. A pastor's heart can look at somebody and say, you're struggling. You're weary. Hey, you just need to come apart before you come apart. You need to step aside. Let me lead you into place. You know, when Elijah the prophet was on the run from Jezebel, she put a bounty on his head. He's the prophet. I mean, he is the called down fire, destroy all the wicked in the world kind of prophet. He had just had this amazing victory. And then he gets this word out him that there's a bounty on his head from that wicked Jezebel. And he goes into a deep, dark depression. Do you know what the shepherd on the throne of heaven did? Sent him an angel with a little food, with a little something to drink, and then told him to take a nap. Y'all underestimate the power of a good nap. Amen. Pastors don't. Pastors like, hey, group nap right up. Let's everybody, come on, let's just take a nap. It's great because apostles and prophets and evangelists don't slow down some of the times to recognize, hey, could we call a time out? We're tired. And we need pastors to raise up. Let me give you something from Isaiah 40, verse 11. It says of God, he will tend his flock like a shepherd. He will gather the lambs in his arms. He will carry them in his bosom and gently lead those that are with young. I love that because it's tender. It's close, it's intimate, and it's individualized. Sometimes I think we get the impression of God is like he's standing on the grand edge of heaven and he's looking down at the mass of people that are his, and all he sees is this massive humanity. But verses like that remind me that God has the capacity to see every single individual perfectly within that massive flock of his people, enough to move in the presence and the power of the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit will pastor you too, by the way. He's the comforter. He's the one that draws up alongside and to take you up in his arms, so to speak. That speaks of your heart being next to his heart. It speaks of his word being whispered in your ear. It speaks of proximity, and that's what pastors do. They like to be near the sheep. Verses 15 and 16. Just to remind you, this is the way God feels about you. I don't mind telling you. I myself will be the shepherd of my sheep. I myself will make them lie down. I will seek the lost. I will bring back the strayed. I will bind up the injured. I will strengthen the weak. This is all about a sheep. I know some of that sounds evangelistic, but he's talking about when his own sheep get lost, not the goats. How many of us could say there have been times in our Christian journey as born-again people where we've just gotten off track, we've just gotten lost, that our zeal was gone, our love for God was gone, our fire had dimmed, we were apathetic, we were lukewarm, we may have been backslidden or distant, and there was nothing in us that thought we could return to God. Aren't you glad that the shepherd saw you as one of his sheep and he came after you? He came after you. Quite frankly, there's a possibility we could, if just left to our own, we'd just keep straying until we're done. But he doesn't let that happen. He goes hard after us in love. By the way, some of y'all had implosions in life. Your life bottomed out. And it's simply because the shepherd wouldn't prosper you in your waywardness. He's like, I love her too much to let her succeed as her heart's so far from me. I've just got to interrupt her pathway. I've got to interrupt his success so that they'll look me back in the eye when I go after them and find them in that long distant place. He says he'll strengthen the weak. So again, I'm just giving you God's heart. If pastors are like the Lord, they keep their eyes on the individual lambs. They see when the individual lambs are weary and anxious and straying and weak and wounded and vulnerable. And it's beautiful to have you don't want an apostle in that moment. You don't really want a prophet most of the time in that moment. The evangelist doesn't really always know what to do with you because they're thinking, well, I'm comforting somebody that's already saved. There's 1,000 people right in this area that don't even know Jesus yet. What you need is a pastor that will just stop everything. Sometimes, guys, it's not a sermon. We got a lot of sermons. I'm a preacher. I like sermons. They're great. But a lot of the time, a sermon is the last thing that's needed. Somebody needs to experience the presence of Jesus wrapped in another Christian who has a pastoral heart and says, I see you hurting, weak, struggling, confused, needing direction, whatever it is. Let me come as a shepherd's heart and meet you there. So moving beyond God himself, y'all got that? I mean, that's not hard, but how many of, I don't want to raise hands, but like, we forget he feels that way about us. If we're not careful, we can lose our sense that God's not some celestial scorekeeper, but that he's a shepherd. He's not up there grading how well you did yesterday. And when you didn't make an A+, he's like, another C-, you're very close to a D, which is close to an F. Try harder. Try harder. That's the way a lot of people hear God. And they can't rest. They have no concept that he's like, hey, how about you look to me and I come right where you are, and I'm not bringing my clipboard. I'm not bringing my score sheet. I'm just bringing my heart because I love you. And I'm going to help you because you're going to be happy when I get you to the place that I've designed for you, and this isn't it. All right, and so it'd be awesome if like Jesus was just like physically with us all day. I mean, it would be great. Like, Jesus, what am I going to do about this right here? And Jesus will say, well, this is what you do. Or you wake up and Jesus is like in the recliner in the den, and you walk in, hey, good morning, Jesus. What are we going to do today? I'm going to tell you what we're going to do today. It's going to be great. That'd be awesome, but it doesn't work that way. We do it by faith. We do it by faith. We're so addicted to the physical that seems more real, and we forget the fact that he's not just in the recliner in the den, he's in you. Like, it's actually better. It's just by faith. So the Lord has to use people to pastor us, people to shepherd us. Yes, his heart's for us, but oftentimes, especially when we're in a rough place where we can't find him, so to speak, he sends somebody with skin on. And he works through people, just like he did in the Old Testament. Moses and Aaron. Listen to what the psalmist wrote about Moses and Aaron in Psalm 77:20. Speaking to God, he said, you led your people like a flock by the hand of Moses and Aaron. God leading his sheep through human instrumentation. That's what he's established, okay? King David, Psalm 78, one psalm later, says of God that he chose David his servant, took him from the sheepfolds, from following the nursing ewes. He brought him to shepherd Jacob, his people, Israel, his inheritance. With an upright heart, he shepherded them and guided them with a skillful hand. So God, in essence, says, it's my determination that I'm going to use some of my people to shepherd others of my people. So we see it even back in the Old Testament. God says, I'm going to actually place an anointing and a grace and an enablement on individuals, and I'm going to deputize them to shepherd my people with my heart. And that's Old Testament. This is before you even get to Ephesians 4:11, where it's made crystal clear that this is what God does. And so we see that the Lord chooses to take care and pastor his people through other people. Some of you are chosen for that capacity. You need to go ahead and not avoid it. I wish I could remove the word pastor. I wish we could start from scratch. I wish we just had a word that nobody ever associated with everything we associate pastor with. Because it's so hard to get out of the briars on this thing. It's like we have to clear out what a pastor isn't just to see if people can receive what a pastor is, and that maybe it's them. And so I prefer the word shepherd. Pastor is more entitled. It's got a title on it. And shepherd is more like, it's going to catch your attention and you're going to say, now what is that? Well, Jeremiah wrote this. He was writing what God was saying. He said, this is what God said. Now watch this. I will give you shepherds after my own heart. It's got to mean something. Like the Lord's not just up there saying, I've got some space in Jeremiah's prophecy. I need to throw something in there. How about this phrase? No, it's like he writes what he wants us to learn. And this is what he wants his people to know. I, God, am going to give you shepherds slash pastors who have my heart for you. And that ought to awaken us up. That ought to make us say, oh, that's awesome. And the component of God's heart that pastors usually demonstrate and carry is the caring, feeling, protecting, nurturing, guiding heart. It is from him to the lambs. It is less to do with mission. Mission we'll get to, but right now this is almost exclusively about relationship from the Father to you and your well-being as you follow Jesus by faith. And God says, I'm going to raise up and put some pastors and shepherds in your life that have my heart. So, it all begins with his son, Jesus. So let's look at Jesus as the shepherd of the flock. So God used some Old Testament people, but when God wanted to walk among men as the shepherd, Jesus says, I am he. John 10, y'all know these words. I'm the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. He who is a hired hand and not a shepherd, who does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees. And the wolf snatches them and scatters them. He flees because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. Jesus says, but I'm the good shepherd. I know my own, I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. Just as the Father knows me and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. So in the natural, a faithful shepherd will get in between the wolf and the lamb. If he has to, he'll risk life and limb because that he knows that's part of his job. My instincts are to keep danger away from my flock. So again, you've got the protective, caring aspect of Jesus Christ to the very extent, by the way, what Jesus actually laid down his life to protect us from was the wages of sin that we all own. We all deserve. Like we can say, okay, he was protecting us from the devil. Well, he does do that. But the thing that he laid down his life for was more than just destroying the works of the devil. It was to protect us from the full weight of judgment that we deserved. And so the Lord is telling us right off the bat, I took your biggest hit first. The thing that was coming after you to destroy you, Paul would write it this way, he who spared not his own son, how shall he not with him freely give us all things? In other words, if God protected you from Satan, the wages of sin, condemnation, and death, don't you think he'll take care of you in these lesser obstacles that you have to deal with in life? That's what a shepherd does. We have no reasonable right to doubt him. Like he proved to us on Calvary, I'll take care of everything. I'm taking care of the worst thing first. So with that, you should know he's going to be with you in all the other things. It's a shepherd's heart. We need a lot of convincing on that, but it is true. John 21. Listen to him with Peter. Peter had blown it. He had bottomed out. Isn't it amazing? Ooh, I like this. I feel the Holy Spirit right there. Some of you don't think you could ever be used by God in a pastoral way because of your history. Well, let Peter tell you, because did you deny the Lord 3 times? Did you start using a bunch of profanity to convince people? I don't know Jesus, never met the man. That's what Peter did. Peter called down curses upon himself, probably cursed with his mouth just to convince everybody, I don't know Jesus, ain't got nothing to do with him. I'm thinking, that guy, Jesus, I'm going to wait while you fling Peter into the bottomless pit. Because I'm thinking, you don't do that to the Lord. Jesus goes after Peter after the resurrection. The shepherd's like, he may have been in the mouth of the wolf, but I'm about to break the wolf's jaw, yank Peter out of the mouth. I'm going to make him a shepherd of my flock. What he did for Peter, he'll do for some of you today. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? You love me more than these other disciples? He said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, feed my lambs. He said to him a second time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? He said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, tend my sheep. He said to him the third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was grieved because he had said to him a third time, do you love me? And he said to him, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. Jesus said to him, feed my sheep. There's no perfect pastors. There's no perfect shepherds. Anybody that's ever shepherded you, anybody that'll ever shepherd you in the future, they do it with a limp. They've got scars underneath that religious garb. They've got their own battle stories. They've got their own bottomed out moments. There's no perfect shepherds. You're not disqualified. The gifts and the callings of God are without repentance. So I'm talking about in the shepherding sense. I'm not talking about elders. I'm not talking about episkopos. I'm not talking about presbyteros. I'm not talking about all the ordained titles. I'm just saying, why don't you take that bottoming out season that God has already delivered you from, and why don't you put that thing in your belt like a bullet? And when you meet somebody else that has bottomed out in a similar way, in a pastoral capacity, you pull that story out, you pull that testimony out, and you fire that weapon right into the wolf that has that person that clutches. You deliver them from that same wolf that had bit into you. See, that's what pastors do. They just get down. They smell like sheep. They got wool on them. Sheep are unpleasant creatures. When the Bible says that we're all like sheep, don't feel too flattered. Sheep are not smart. You know in Psalm 23 it says, He restoreth my soul. Man, it sounds so good in the King James. The Lord, the shepherd, restoreth my soul. Do you know what that's a picture of? It's a picture of a sheep who hadn't been sheared, who the weight of its wool had gotten so heavy that when it fell, it rolled over on its back and it couldn't get itself up. And literally, it's got its paws up in the air doing that while it's laying on this. And the restoring is when the shepherd comes over and says, you did it again, didn't you? Come here. He said, and the sheep says, thank you, shepherd. It's good to be back. I got to do that every time I preach on the shepherd. I got to throw something like that in there. My point being is this, is like, you know, sheep are difficult. They're not smart. They're not intimidating. Sorry, I was just reliving that moment. You know, sheep aren't impressive. You ever seen a gang of sheep scaring people? Run, run. It's an intimidating group of sheep. We're not that impressive. We need protection. We need care. We need compassion. We need correction. We need somebody to look us in the eye, take time with us, go where we are, even if we're not where we're supposed to be, to meet us there and bring us. Like, that's what pastors do. So I'll finish with New Testament pastors. And we'll go to 1 Peter 5. I'm going to read you some verses that for many years I probably preached these verses more than any other epistle in the New Testament. Because I remember just walking, I remember as a denominational pastor. Can I testify for a minute? I already told you get to leave when you're done. I remember, like, I didn't know what I signed up for. And all I knew, and I was a lead pastor 8 years after I got delivered from drugs and alcohol, with very little training, ton of zeal, some unrefined gifts that the Lord had given me. But I remember the only thing I knew is I watched my pastor be in charge of everything. He seems to be doing okay. When he resigned and I stepped into that, I'm thinking, I got to do what he does. Problem is his gifts were completely different than mine. And immediately, the comparison started. Jeff, my 12-year-old had a tooth pulled, and you did not meet us at the dentist. True story. True story. I had a guy that left our church angry as fire at me. And when his adult son graduated from college, this is years later, this man called me up and said, why weren't you at his graduation? And I'm thinking, I'm not your pastor. And you cursed me. I didn't exactly feel welcomed at the graduation. But the expectations, marry, bury, how many people have you won to the Lord? We'd go to all these preacher conferences, and these big blowhards, these big brothers would get up there and brag about how many people they won to Jesus. So I'm sitting there thinking, I haven't won anybody to Jesus this week. And they won 9 on the way to church this morning. The only thing that I was really good at was leadership and teaching the word. And we didn't have language for apostleship or prophetic or anything like that. And so the comparisons were there. And I remember living under the weight of people just analyzing me. And by the way, there were a ton of encouraging people. There's still a few people that are here today that were with me back then. I see your faces out, and somehow we've survived all that together. But there were some that appreciated the gifts, but there were a lot that just all they could see is that I wasn't like the last guy or the guy they wanted me to be. And I didn't understand that that wasn't actually my problem to solve. That's the thing that you need to know. The unreasonable expectation of the sheep towards human shepherds is that it's a one-stop shop. And God's saying to his church, I actually never said that. Y'all said that. That's why y'all are miserable, and that's why that person you call pastor is miserable, because none of y'all are doing it my way. And that's what reforming the church is about. For us to tear off the Band-Aid, say, ooh, this needs to be reformed. So let's just go there to 1 Peter 5. We're talking about elders here, and there are overlap. There's often overlap between elder. It's not synonymous. They're not the exact same thing, but they do have overlap. So Peter said, I exhort the elders among you as a fellow elder and a witness of the sufferings of Christ, as well as a partaker of the glory that's going to be revealed. Here's his command to the elders. Shepherd the flock of God. Exercise oversight. Don't do it under compulsion. Do it willingly, as God would have you. Don't do it for shameful gain. Don't do it for the paycheck, but do it eagerly. Don't domineer over those in your charge, but be examples to the flock. And when the chief shepherd, everybody say Jesus, appears, you will receive the unfading crown of glory. Okay, what we have here is now Jesus is ascended back to heaven. Ephesians 4:11 through 16 that says when he ascended, he gave gifts unto the church. Those gifts were individuals. Some of them were apostles, some were prophets, some were evangelists, some were shepherds, and some were teachers. That's the gifts. He gave the gift of human leadership to the church. People with anointed grace callings on their life to fulfill those offices in the church. Now, you may never have an office in the church, but what you have to do as a Christian is explore where do my gifts that he has given me, which one of these do I lean more into than the others? So you may not be a prophet per se, but you might be prophetic. You may not be an apostle, but you may be apostolic. You may not be a titled pastor, but you may be very pastoral, and so on and so on. My point is this, is that when we are shepherding together in fivefold ministry, we don't call our leadership team elders. We call them the senior leadership team. We have reasons for that I don't go into today, but none of our leaders are exactly like the others. There's 7 of us, and none of them are exactly like the others. We don't want a homogeneous cookie-cutter leadership team. I intentionally, when I started building the team out, went for people that were different than me. And I'm presently saying, God, we need somebody that bleeds pastoral heart on that team that is qualified to lead. But we can't wait on getting somebody on the team. We've got dozens of pastors and shepherds right here in this room. And together, what is our job? Tend the flock. Oversee. Keep your eye on what's happening to the flock. And then he says, and be examples to the flock. If you're a Bible nerd like me, that word example in verse number 3, 1 Peter 5:3, it's a Greek word, and it's the same word that is used when Thomas put his hand in the nail print of Jesus. That example is the word translated nail print. God says, when you're shepherding the flock, exemplify the sacrificial heart of the shepherd. Never forget the nails. Never forget the sacrifice. Never forget the dying to self and dying to sin and dying to other things. Then we get to Acts chapter 2. I'm almost done. Paul says this, he's leaving a church that as an apostle he established, and it was time to move on to his next assignment. So he's talking to the elders and he says to them, pay careful attention to yourselves and to all the flock in which the Holy Spirit has made you overseers to care for the church of God. You get a bunch right there. Just pause there for a minute. You can leave that verse up on the screen. These men in Acts 20 were appointed. Watch for the safety and the welfare of the entire flock. But as you do that, it has to get down to more of a micro level. The flock is general. The lambs that make up the flock are very important to the heart of the Lord. And so they have to be important to those that are called to oversee. He says you got to show care for the church of God. I've told you many times, and it's not defense, it's just telling you, because some of you are new and you've not heard me say it, that I don't have the office of Pastor Grace. But let me tell you the one part of pastoring that I do have, protecting the flock. Probably, in my opinion, it's not that I don't love and I don't care. I do. I do love, I do care, I do teach, I do all that stuff. But the component of pastoring that you'll see rise up in me fiercely is when something threatens this flock. I will bust out the rod and staff and billy club, not a human, but billy club, whatever that spirit is, because it threatens the flock of which I'm the lead overseer. That's part of a pastor's job. You do it with your kids, and if you don't do it with your kids, you need to start doing it with your kids. You shepherd your children, you shepherd the flock of God, and sometimes that means keep your eye on it. You need to see the wolf coming long before it gets there. But you can't domineer. You have to be an example. And you care for the church of God, and there he says in verse 31 of Acts 20, therefore be alert. I'm going to give you this, and then I'm going to give you some instructions, and we're going to be out of here before 2:30. Okay, here we go. I want you to listen to this, especially if you're feeling like maybe this shepherd thing that I'm describing is resonating in your spirit. Shepherds care for people. Shepherds care for people. It's their primary desire. They want to connect horizontally with people. They enjoy people. They love people. They carry a concern about people. They hear the Lord talking to them about people. They care for the sheep. They care for the strong sheep. They care for the straying sheep. I'm going to give you a bunch of alliteration here. They care for the sick sheep, spiritually sick sheep. Pastors care about them. The soiled sheep, not to be gross, but sheep mess all over themselves. Somebody's got to clean that up. Who does it? The shepherds. They care for sleepy sheep. There's a whole lot of sleepy sheep in the church these days. People yawning their way into what's coming. And good pastors will say, I want to comfort you when you're afflicted, but I'm going to afflict you when you're comfortable. Because we got people sleeping their way into what's coming. And shepherds, I'll just say this, you can't always be sweet. Love is not perpetually making everybody feel awesome about themselves. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is say, wake up! Shepherds care for the savaged sheep that have been ripped apart. One of the reasons I'm so grateful to be affiliated with Good Landing Recovery is because most of the people that go through recovery, by the way, I'm preaching out there with you guys on Friday if y'all come. Well, that wasn't meant for applause, but I'm glad you're encouraged. But I remember what it was like to be savaged and ravaged by my sin, by the world, by people, by the devil. And I'm so grateful that our church is the kind of church that wants GLR to be here. And we're not looking for the people that have it all together. If you've got it all together, one, you're deceived. You don't have it all together. But if you think you have it all together, you're welcome to come, but you're going to find out that like the best people to receive all that God offers are the broken people. Jesus said, I didn't come to heal the well. I came to heal the sick. And so some have been savaged and ravaged. Pastors. I think some of the women in this church have gone to GLR and poured into these ladies outside of our church services and stuff. Jeff Perrine works there. My son works there. And it's just a great place to say, hey, look, Jesus presses into people whose lives have been ripped up. And he's the healer, and he's the counselor, and he's the one who cares. So this type of care, shepherds, Pastor Ken, if you want to bring your team up, it's great. This type of care is a normal part of flock life. All this caring for people. Every shepherd learns how to do these kind of things as God has wired her or him. The pastor, you need to eject this out of your mind. The true pastor is not primarily or necessarily an instructor, but they're a relational guide who walks alongside other people. And all my life, I thought the pastor was the person that preaches on Sunday. Sometimes. But you don't have to be able to, exegetically take a passage of scripture apart, put it back together, and feed the flock with that. That's the office of teacher that we'll talk about, I think, next week. Some of you are pastors. Your heart cares richly and deeply. You'd melt into a puddle if somebody put you up here and handed you a microphone and said, preach, teach. That's not your deal. But you get one-on-one with somebody and you feel the Spirit of God. That's you.